morning. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly tell you, I'm a bit sleep deprived, but don't worry about it. If I fall asleep, wake me up. Not happening. This morning, I want to speak to you about missions. I was asked to speak to you about missions, and I thought, oh, okay, I like that. I can do that. Then my mind got going. And those of you who know me, that can be dangerous. And I suddenly started thinking of all the things I could say to you about missions. And lots of pages later, I'm like, I could talk for 2 to 3 hours. Don't worry, I won't. But I do want to, I want to share my heart more than anything this morning about missions. And trying to figure out, where do I start? There's so much that can be said. I want to just take a quick survey. How many of you, the first time you heard about Jesus was not in a church? Okay, several of you. The first time I heard about Jesus, I was 7 years old. I was on a playground talking to another child that was my age, who had gone to Sunday school, who'd had a wonderful Sunday school teacher, and he told me about Jesus. And I share that with you because he died 3 hours later in a car accident. That has impacted my life because I was swinging on the swing at 7 years old, and this young man telling me about Jesus. And we went our separate ways and went on and did our thing. And his name was James McIntyre. I'll be looking for him when I get to heaven, because I know that's where he is. But that being said, that was kind of like the beginning of missions in a way. We know that, well, let me start off with, I want to define missions to you. So somewhere on here we have this. I need to put my glasses on. What is missions? Mark 16:15. He said to them, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. So I looked up missions. I'm one of those teacher things, we love to grab that dictionary and see what it says. So in the dictionary, it gives this definition, 2 definitions. An important assignment carried out for political, religious, or commercial purposes, typically involving travel. The second one says the vocation or a calling of a religious organization, especially a Christian one, to go out into the world and spread its faith. Do you guys know who the first missionary was? If we think about, yes, who said that? Jesus. If you think about the fact that it means travel, he left heaven, traveled to earth to tell us about the gospel, to tell us the good news. Let's talk about, so that's what missions is. It's to go out and specifically to give the good news. That is the purpose. The person. So this is where I want to kind of get into the meat of this, because all of us have heard the Great Commission, and we're supposed to go out there and preach the gospel. I just said that to you. But who was Jesus talking to when he said that? Because I have heard this said many, many times. That's all of us. We're all supposed to go out there and preach the gospel. We're supposed to all go traveling somewhere to preach the gospel. So I'm going to just tell you very quickly, when I was young and I started understanding about missionaries, my prayer, do not send me. Okay? I'm not called to be a missionary. That is not my thing. Because here's what I'm looking at. Okay, this is going to be kind of crass. I like porcelain pots. And when I think about missionaries going to Africa or going to Uganda or somewhere, I'm thinking outhouses. I like my comfort. Okay, so I'm just being honest with you. I don't know about the rest of you. I like my comfort. I'm not interested in going anywhere to do anything where I'm going to be uncomfortable. So that's not a problem for you. But anyway, going back to that, I was glad to know that that wasn't necessarily my calling. It was many years later when I discovered that. Because we've always been told that. But in looking at the scriptures, in Mark 16:14, later Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. That conversation where he says, "Go ye into all the world," was to those 11 disciples. This was very specific. Now, we know that there were other believers at that time. Now, this conversation took place after he had risen. Okay? After he had risen. In fact, immediately after his resurrection, he told the women to go and tell the disciples. He didn't tell them go to the whole world. That wasn't what they were told to do. It was just go here and tell them. And then he spoke to them and told them they're to go into all the world. So, not wanting to contradict what we've been taught about the Great Commission, but being very specific and studying what the Word of God says, he was very specifically talking to the disciples. So if you guys are like me, whew, porcelain pots, it's my thing. All right, so in doing some studying and reading this, there's a word called Talmud, and it's a Hebrew, and the word for the disciple is Talmud. This word stresses the relationship between the rabbi, the teacher or Jesus, and the disciple, the student. A Talmud of Jesus' day would give up his entire life in order to be with his teacher. Jesus gave up his entire life in order to come down here and teach. Think about that. Now, I want you to understand this because you have to get this concept in order to understand about missionaries. Jesus left his comfort zone. And he came here. Now, think about it. We know how glorious heaven is. We know there's no trials, there's no tribulation. Weather is always wonderful. You can sit by the crystal sea. Why would you give all that up to come down here? Seriously. I had a joke when I was in college with a girlfriend of mine as I was trying to share to her about the love of Jesus and about how wonderful heaven is going to be. So just in case when you guys get there and you're walking around and you're seeing all the mansions, mine will be the one with the big front porch, fresh strawberries hanging. Perfect strawberries. There won't be anything, they will just be perfect. I can just pick them for breakfast, invite you over for lunch. It's wonderful. I cannot imagine. And then Jesus is going to be there. And hopefully my mansion is next door to his, but we'll see. But he left all of that glory, all of that, and he came down. He wasn't born in a mansion. He was born in a barn. He didn't live like a king. In fact, he was pretty much homeless after he grew up, living from friend to friend. You know those people that sleep on your couch this week and they're on somebody else's couch the next week. This is kind of what it was. Now, when you talk about disciples, that they're so in touch with their teacher that they learn to live like their teacher. So when he was talking to the 12 about go out and to preach the gospel, as a disciple, he was also calling them to live like him. No home foundation, depending on other people in some ways to help you out, giving up your job. How often do we hear in the story that Jesus spent a lot of time at home with mom and dad. Holidays coming. He had siblings. We don't hear that. He gave that up. Now he's not only left the wonderful, glorious part of heaven, he gets down there and has a family, and he doesn't have that family tie like we have, like we think about. We don't hear that in here. So you think of all the things he's given up. What love. That he would love any one of us to that extent. Now understand, when I say how much he loves you, we are some 2,000, 25,000 years away from all that happened when he was here. He had a plan to make sure that each one of you here today have the opportunity to hear of his love. That plan was through people that had to give up like he did, live like him, so that today, here in this country, we know about the love of Jesus. What an amazing love. What an amazing love that he gave all of that up. All of that up. For you. For me. So that a little boy who had a Sunday school teacher tell him about the love of Jesus tells me about the love of Jesus. And today I can stand here and tell you about the love of Jesus. What a plan he had. And it all began because he gave up so much to let you know how much he loved you. I want to explain that to you because I think it's important that we understand that this is part of the missions call for those who are called to be missionaries. So I want to share with you some of my experiences in life as a missionary and with missionaries, because I feel that's where God wants us to go. So we talked about the person, and that's a person who's specifically called, like Jesus was, to travel and to give up the comforts that we all experience and that I'll selfishly tell you I like. So I want to talk about support of missionaries. When I was 17, just a couple of years ago. Hey, what are you laughing about? Okay, so anyway, when I was 17 years old, I had an opportunity to go on a missions trip. If you've never been on one, I think everybody should go on one. So I want you to understand what this was for me and why I have a passion for missions. It was kind of a big deal to be elected as a kid at that time to be able to go on a missions trip. So I was very excited. So the Assemblies of God is this great big huge thing, which is part of who we are. And they have a district office in Missouri. And in order to go on a missions trip as a teenager, you had to go through all these changes to prove that you were what you were, that you were a believer, and all of this. And I wanted that prestige. Didn't understand the work that's going to come with it. So anyway, I got the okay to go on a missions trip. And first thing I had to do was raise support, because the missions trip costs money. And we fund our own missions trip, which is what missionaries generally do. They're giving up everything, and then they got to go get some money so they can go do something. So I'm raising this money, and God said to me, because, okay, those of you who know me know I'm pretty independent. I like to get it done myself. So I knew how much money I had to raise, and I figured it out. I was working at Howard Johnson's, and I figured how many nights and which groups of people that come in for parties, like the Shriners, I knew which one gave the great tips. So I had it all figured out on how I was going to raise this money. And I had just so much time to do it, and it was great. My church was very supportive, but I need to tell you that my church was a group of people that were not very wealthy. There was nobody in that church who was going to whip out $100 and say, go. I loved it if they could have. But I was touched by the fact that I will never remember, the first person to donate to my cause was this man and his wife. They were extremely poor. They were farmers. And he was so excited to come up one Sunday and say, God has blessed me with an extra $5, and Christine, you get it for your missions trip. Now, that may not sound like much to you, but to know who these people were and to know that $5 for them was probably like $3,000. I mean, it was an extreme sacrifice. But they understood that I was going to share who God was. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, I've now talked to God and told him my plan and how I'm going to raise the rest of this money. You guys don't do that? Okay, well, it's part of who I am. So I'm telling God, so I've got this plan, and if I work this weekend, and if I work this. And then God said, hush. Seriously, God? I'm helping you. I want you to go to camp for 2 weeks. One as a camper and one as a counselor. Lord, those are the 2 weeks when I can make the most money. The Shriners are going to be. Do you realize how much money comes in when the Shriners are here? Do you realize what kind of tips? I can work this one by myself. I can make. So, God, I think we got to have a new, I'm helping you. Hush. Go to camp. So now I'm not only going to make my extra money because I had it all figured out, I'm going to lose money. And I went to camp. So the first week of camp, I went to camp. I was there as a counselor. So wonderful to see children coming to the Lord as a counselor. That blessed my heart, and I was thankful to be a part of that. The second week, those who have supported me, we've now raised $50 toward I think it's $2,000 I needed to have. And I'm like, Lord, I could have made a big, huge chunk here. We're sure we're making the right thing. He said, don't worry about it. Now, my parents at that time were not Christians, and they weren't too excited about me even going on this trip, let alone the fact that I'm expecting them to help pay for this. And my dad was definitely not on board with this. And I said to my dad, don't you worry about it. God's got this. Yeah, well, you better believe God better have it because I'm not putting all that money out. I said, don't worry about it, Dad. God is going to show up and show out. And I was hoping that I was helping him, but apparently I wasn't helping God right. At that camp, the second camp, I was a considerable amount of money short, and I had 1 week left to get it, to make it. And there was a pastor who was speaking at that camp from the headquarters. And he was on the platform. Okay, so that morning I'd gone to the altar to pray by myself. And I'm walking up and down the church by myself praying, well, God, you promised now. How is this going to show up? Da-da-da-da-da. I'm just telling God you're not doing your job and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so, and you guys are laughing. Well, so some dear Christian woman happened to hear me talking out loud and reprimanded me that you don't talk to God like that. And, well, I'm just kind of young and do my thing, and I figured that if God is God, he can take whatever I put out. And he can take my being honest, because he already knows me anyway, so why fake it? So I'm going on, okay, well, thank you, dear, and da-da-da. So anyway, now I've chewed God out and reminded him that, you've only got a few days left to get your job done. And, okay, I'm being honest. So anyway, that night, this pastor's up on the platform, and I'm watching him like, what is wrong with this man? He keeps bending over and picking up money and sticking it in his pocket. And then it falls out again, and he keeps picking it up. I'm like, what a nut. So anyway, he gets up and he says, is Christine Hargrave here? Christine, come on up here. Now, then he tells everybody that I'm going to do this missions thing. Now, with us all teenagers, right, all my age, how much money do you think at the end of camp is in these pockets? Not happening. So he goes on and explains to them about my need. And he says, God has been telling me I need to put money in. This is why, if you were wondering why I keep picking this money up, because God says we're going to take an offering for Christine. So they take up this offering at the beginning of the service. I'm overwhelmed by the fact that they did this even. The service ends. My pastor's wife comes up to me. She says, Christine, the church took up an offering while we're here at camp, and here's how much came in. And I'm like, wow, we're almost there. Dad's only going to have to pay maybe half of it. The offering that they took up that night matched it to the exact penny. And I was like, okay, God's really making me go. Now, that part of the story is great, but here's the reason why God did not let me make the money. I am deathly fearful of bugs. Okay, this is not a light thing. I have come out of clothes for the fact the spider has dropped down. I'm just telling you. I had a friend say, you came out of that jacket and you were over here before the jacket hit the ground. And some of you know about my fear of mice. Well, my fear of spiders is even worse. Cockroaches, there is no hope. So we have this big training. We go to Springfield for this training. I meet a woman who'd gone to Jamaica the year before. She starts telling me about the bugs. Cockroaches as big as my hand. They fly. I'm like, Lord, I'm out of here. You did not call me to this. I'm done. We're finished. Not happening. God is amazing how he moves. I went up to the top of Evangel College on the roof trying to figure out how I'm getting back home because I am not going on this missions trip. It is not going to happen. And God says, well, how are you going to give everybody back their money? Offering. How do you give people back their money? I could have kept my money. I only knew about the $5 that came from the first guy who served. I don't know where the rest of these monies came from in an offering. I can't give back the money. Now I'm really in a nook. And I'm up on the roof. I am pacing. This is just not going to happen. And I met a woman up there, and apparently she was going up there maybe to commit suicide. Did not know that was a college student, and there were some circumstances. I don't want to go into that. So I stopped and talked with her. And then we both ended up going back in. I later found out some of the other stuff of that story. Now I've told the people that I'm working with that are on my team about my fear, and they're just laughing. They don't really believe it. We're on a bus going to a training. Spider drops down. I'm practically out of the bus. I am pushing on the emergency door to get off the bus. Now my whole team knows this is not a joke. This woman is deathly fearful. We go to this training, and then they're praying over me. And now I still have no way to go home. I can't figure out how to give the money back, so off to Jamaica I go. On the plane, I am convinced that every bug on the island is coming to the airport to greet me when we get there. I am praying frantically. I am scared to death. And we got there. We got off the plane. We were there for about an hour and a half, and I realized I hadn't seen any bugs. But this is the transforming power of God. I'm standing talking to one of the natives there. I've got my hand up on the wall like this, and we're chatting. And I look over. I have an extra finger. It is a cockroach. Now, everybody who has ever known me would have known that meant you saw me here, I'm in the parking lot. 2 seconds later, I literally put my hand down and said, oh, and moved over. This is God. This is not me at all. And that night, I realized how powerful God is when he sends you. There were lots of miracles that went on that I got to be a part of while I was on that trip. But I tell you that because if God calls you to do something, he will equip you to do it. But the part that I want you to get was that I was surrounded by people who supported me in the process of my call. And I want you to understand that maybe you are not called to be the disciple to go out, but maybe you are called to help encourage those missionaries that do. Over the years, I have learned what missionaries give up. We talked about how Jesus gave up. If you're a true disciple of God and you were going out to be on the missions field, you are giving up. The thing that comforts, when I got back to the United States, the thing that I discovered I missed more than anything was a Snickers bar. I could not wait till that plane landed in Florida and I could find a candy machine and have a Snickers. Now, that's a little thing, but imagine that you've given this up I was only gone for a month. Imagine you're one of the missionaries that our churches support that are gone out of the country for 4 years at a time, and they come back on furlough. How many of them are looking for that Snickers bar? And now they're back, and they don't have a house to go to. They're going to borrow someone's home while they're on furlough, unless they're fortunate enough to go live with their parents, and then they're going to go around and continue to raise support. How many of you know missionaries personally? How many of you have them in your homes and get involved? When I recognized and understood what missionaries are giving up, they're giving up their lives. They don't have a life like I do. I love the fact that I can come and speak. I love the fact that I can be involved in ministry, that I can talk to people around me and share the love of God. But I can go back home and be comfortable. Put my feet up, watch some crazy sitcom. How many of us like the comforts of life like that? How many of us are really wanting to go out on the missions field and give it all up? So I wanted my children to understand the importance of missions. And so we started getting involved with missionaries personally. There was a family that we knew. They were missionaries to in Arabia. And they had 4 children. And this is about the time I was adopting my children. And they would come to our home when they were on furlough, so every 4 years, and they'd spend a week with us while they were out doing their things. 4 kids, they're all boys, chaotic, seriously. And the first year they came, I had just gotten my son who was autistic. All that kind of stuff was just over him. And yet I wanted them to understand what these children, because of the missionaries, what they were giving up, and to understand. I knew a missionary. She was a missionary to parts of Native America and living on the reservations. And she says, you give it up. You totally immerse yourself in that. So she talked about some of the things that she missed on a day-to-day basis. And I say this to you because I want you to think about your part in this. Paul talked about the Philippian church. John 3, 5 through 8. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, for the name of Jesus, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought, therefore, to show hospitality to such people that we may work together for the truth. Paul talks in Philippians 4:15. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with me, with the gospel, I was set out from Macedonia. Not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. As a church, do we see a need to really recognize those who are literally called to give up their lives and their comforts and the things that they enjoy to immerse themselves into putting out the gospel? Them that will live like Jesus did. We are to love like Jesus. We are to do our part. But not every single one of us is called to go out on the mission field. But I do believe as a church, as a body of believers, as lovers, we have a responsibility to support them. And further in the Bible, I'm watching the time, but further in the Bible, it talks about how not only did they give physically money, they came alongside of them and supported them. A couple of times, some of the people from the church actually went along with Paul for a short time. That's why sometimes we say, let's go serve a missions somewhere that's close to us. Let's go on a missions trip, because we're encouraging them by showing up. We're not giving everything up for the duration of our lives, but we are enabling them If you take the time to get to know a missionary family personally, send them a thank you card. Okay, time has moved along, and when I was younger, and my kids were, we'd try to remember the birthdays. We'd have a particular family, and we'd try to remember the birthdays. Things have moved along. We're not doing cards and stuff like that. Sometimes there are places that they cannot have that communication because of their situation and the danger that they're in. But we need to pray for them. And we need to pray mindful of what they're giving up and how hard it is. To know missionaries personally and start understanding, they struggle like you and I do. They have down days. They get discouraged. They're like, why am I here? I'm tired of this. I'd like to go back home. I'd like to have keepsakes. Early missionaries took Bibles in caskets because that's how they were coming home, in their casket. They were giving it all up for Jesus. Here's the glorious part. The Bible talks about we are all fit together, but we have hands, we have feet, we have heart. But all of this makes up the body of God. If everybody was just one part of the body, what would get done? What is your part of the body in helping with missions, of getting the gospel out? Don't undermine what little thing you may do if you're the Sunday school teacher that inspires the kid that spoke to me on the park. That's huge. Let's support those. What about the missionary that's gone to the foreign field whose life may be threatened? And yet they know that and they go. What about the missionary who has to go? I heard this joke. They're on the mission field. Cockroach goes. She screams, ah! 4 months later, oh yeah, there it goes. 1 year later, catch dinner. Because in some countries, that's a delicacy. Not happening. But here's the glory. When we were singing earlier, one of the songs they were singing is about every nation praising God together. Oh my gosh. How wonderful is that going to be? When every nation, they've come from every nation. Maybe you weren't there in Ghana where the missionary went, but you helped support that missionary. And because of that, there is a life that's going to be in heaven praising God with us. Amen? What are you doing? Maybe you know, sometimes we say we're going to pray because that's the easy way out, you know? And then maybe if you're lucky, you actually mumbled a prayer. But how many of you have really said, Lord, I'm going to take this missionary on in my mind, in my heart. I'm going to pray for them. And if you enable me, I'm going to support them financially. And when they're here, I'm going to try to make it a point to encourage them to do whatever. We had some missionaries that were over in Azerbaijan that my son was very close to because she made spaghetti before they left. And periodically, he would remind me that we needed to pray for her. And we actually had a phone number, and we would call them 2 or 3 times a year just to encourage them. There's so much we can do. But understand that your part in supporting them, we're supporting the kingdom of God. How huge is that? Imagine when you get to heaven, and because you did something to support somebody, they came up to you and said, thank you. You helped, and I'm here. How would that feel? How would that feel? I want to end the service by asking you to think about what is your part in missions. And I'm going to have them play this song in closing. It's a little long, but I want you to think about it and think about it in minds of you. And I want to say this, going back to the beginning of this, if it hadn't been for somebody who listened to the call of God, would we be here today? Would we have the privilege of knowing who Jesus is because someone spoke to us? What are we doing?